Hey guys, I'm Dan from ShastaBubba Adventures, and not long ago I made a video about hiking solo in Grizzly Country, and I mentioned in passing that I usually am not making much noise on the trail, but when I see bear sign, then I get really busy, usually singing some hokey song or just shouting out, "Hey bear," a whole bunch.
Hey bear!
And it occurred to me later that there may be folks out there who don't really know what I mean by bear sign. So today I'm going to explain that bear sign just means signs of recent activity, and we'll go over in detail what those signs are. This is some really handy stuff to know, especially if you do plan to be hiking in grizzly country, but most of the tips I'm going to be sharing apply just as much to black bears. If you know the signs to be watching out for, then you know when you want to be on high alert, but perhaps even more importantly, when not to be overly anxious about running into a bear on the trail. Well, it's 15 degrees outside and snowing, so we're back in the cabin with a cozy fire, making videos to help you increase the enjoyment of your wilderness activities. And if you're new to the channel, welcome, and please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. So 2 warnings to start out with here. First, I am not a biologist or a bear expert, and so the things I'm sharing with you today are just tips that I've picked up over 20 plus years of hiking in grizzly country and some things that I just wanted to share with you. I'm not pretending to know all things about bears, and I'll certainly very much appreciate if a bear expert actually does watch this video and wants to make some correction to some point that I've made. Second warning, we're about to talk in great detail about poop, so if you're squeamish about such things, now would be the time to look away. Bear poop, or scat, is probably the sign that most backpackers notice the most often. Tracks actually are more common, but we tend not to notice them. But when you're hiking along and there's a great big pile in the middle of the trail, that's hard to miss. Now, how to tell bear scat from all other possibilities? Well, I think it's fair to say that the feces of every other large animal in the northern Rockies are pelletized. Deer, elk, and even moose are browsers, which means that they have very efficient digestive systems that enables them to eat many forms of vegetation and process all the nutrients. So they all produce these tightly compacted pellets, kind of like little oval marbles. Even horses make a kind of pellet about the size and shape of a charcoal briquette. Predators, on the other hand, tend to poop out logs, like a dog, and all the other predators in the Rockies are much smaller than bears. So you can tell the difference between a wolf and cougar scat, for example, and bear scat just by the size of the pile. Bears are huge, and so is their business. Basically, if you're hiking along and you see a pile and your first thought is a 400-pound man took a dump in the middle of the trail, it's probably bear poop. Consistency differs depending on what the bear has been feeding on, so typically in mid to late summer, the pile will look like a bunch of berry parts and not well formed. Other times of the year, it's more likely to be solid and black to brown and log-shaped, or maybe broken up, with hair from the carcass they've been feeding on. Anytime I come upon some bear scat in the trail, I'm always going to investigate that to learn what it can tell me about my proximity to that bear. There's 3 things that I'll do. First is I'll probably knock it with the end of the trekking pole to gauge the weight, because if it's all dried out, that means it's old and I don't have to worry about the bear. This one you can tell is pretty old, pretty dried up. Yeah, it just flakes off. So that's old. Nobody around here. If it's heavy, that means it isn't dried out. So the second thing I'll do is poke it with the tip of the trekking pole. And what I'm trying to figure out there is whether it's formed a crust around the outside and is soft on the inside, kind of like a Snickers bar. It takes probably a day or 2 for that crust to form, so that can tell me a little bit more about how close he is. Now this is still true even if the bear has been feasting on berries all day and the scat is just a pile of old berry parts. It'll still form a crust in a day or two. And if it's all soft, the third thing I'll do is actually touch it to feel the temperature, whether it's hot or cold. Now that might sound gross. You don't have to, squish it in your hands. You just got to barely touch it with your fingertips and you can tell instantly if it's cold or warm. And if it's cold, that doesn't really tell me a whole lot. It's at least 3 or 4 hours old. But if it's warm, I really want to know that, because that means there is a bear in the neighborhood and I want to start making a lot of noise real quick. So far I haven't had the experience of touching it and finding it warm, and I'm okay with that. After investigating the scat, I want to start looking for tracks and see what I can tell from the trail. This is a good trail for tracks. You can see there's just enough dust to be able to make them out pretty clearly. And what I'm seeing is the tracks of 2 or 3 humans and an occasional horseshoe print. Looks like a little young deer came through, probably this morning, judging by how fresh those are. But what I'm not seeing is any bear tracks, which means that all this other traffic indicates that it's been a while since the bear was here, because all these other tracks are on top of what the bear would have done. And you can always tell for sure in thick forest like this, bears are not stupid. They want to use the path of least resistance. So they love our trail system. They can travel far and fast using the trails. So it's unlikely that a bear would have passed through here and not used this trail. Now, not being a professional tracker, I don't bother searching for tracks generally, because quite honestly I just lack the ability to see the subtle signs that a pro can see. Instead, I do pay attention to look for tracks in soft ground, like deep dust or snow. That's a pretty clear bear track. Or best of all, mud next to a stream crossing. Anytime I come across a patch of mud on the trail, I scan it for tracks, and if the muddy spot is wide enough and there are no bear tracks, it's a pretty good indication that there probably are none around. If there is a track, there's a pretty simple method to tell the difference between a black bear and a grizzly track. Now, this book is the Falcon Guide to Scats and Tracks of Rocky Mountains, and I'll put a link to this in the description below. It's a really useful book for identifying tracks and scat generally, which is just fun to learn about. And at just 4.5 ounces, it's not too heavy to carry in your ultralight pack. Now you can see in this illustration that if you draw a line from the bottom of the little toe to the bottom of the big toe, the black bear's toes create an arc. But here you can see that by drawing that same line, the grizzly's toes are nearly straight across. There's another good one. See how it's in a straight line across the toes, and you can see the points where the claws dug in. Another sign that you may come across less often is when a bear is digging for insects next to the trail. They might have dug a hole on the uphill side and left a mound of dirt spilling onto the trail. This is an example of a bear digging. It's a little old, of course, with the snow in it. But it could be also a rotten log next to the trail. This looks like it was just run through a shredder. Now, if you're really sharp-eyed, you might spot a tree where a bear has raked the bark vertically, sharpening its claws, or even strands of fur left behind in the brush, especially in a thicket of berries where they were grazing. Personally, I think the only time I've ever seen fur is actual traps that were set by wildlife biologists, which are just short strands of barbed wire nailed to a tree that the bear is likely to scratch its back on. And that's a great easy way for researchers to gather DNA evidence on the bears, so never remove hair from those if you happen to see them. One last point about tracks is that they tend to degrade over time with the wind and the rain rounding the edges. So if a track appears very sharp with very clean edges start singing now.
They're old enough that they're rounded off from the rain, but don't know how long it takes to round off the snow in the rain.
Okay guys, if you've got more questions or tips that you'd like to share about hiking in Grizzly Country, please leave those in the comments section below. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.